They told her the Duke was rotting, that his flesh was failing him slowly, beneath layers of silk and shadow. Those servants whispered outside his doors but never lingered, that no woman stayed long enough to speak of what she had seen. So Amelia Hart pressed a lace handkerchief to her nose, as the heavy oak doors of Blackthorn Manor began to open. She braced herself, steeled her breath, prepared for the stench of decay that everyone promised would greet her. But when she stepped inside the master chamber, there was nothing. No rot, no foul air, no corpse-like odor clinging to the velvet drapes or settling into the Persian rugs. Only silence, clean air, and the quiet sound of a man breathing somewhere in the dimness. Amelia lowered the handkerchief slowly, her fingers trembling despite her best efforts to appear composed. The chamber stretched before her in shades of midnight blue and charcoal gray. Candlelight flickered from silver sconces casting long shadows across mahogany furniture and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Everything was immaculate, ordered, nothing like the diseased nightmare she had been promised. "You may enter fully," a voice said from the darkness near the window, "or you may leave. Either choice is yours." Amelia's spine straightened. She had been raised to be useful, not ornamental, to solve problems, not flee from them. So she stepped forward, letting the door close behind her with a soft click that felt far too final. The man emerged from the shadows slowly, and Amelia's breath caught despite herself. The Duke Julian Thorne was not the monster Victor had described. He was tall, lean, and moved with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to managing pain without complaint. His dark hair was swept back from a face that bore the sharp aristocratic features of old bloodlines, but it was his hands that drew her attention. Strong, capable hands, but they trembled slightly as they rested on the arms of the chair. His skin was pale, almost translucent in places, with faint marks along his jaw and the visible portion of his neck. Strange discolorations that looked like bruises, but weren't quite. Like his body was at war with itself in ways no physician had named. Yet his eyes were clear, intelligent, watching her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and seen. "I was told you required a woman," Amelia said, her voice colder than she intended. She had practiced this distance, needed it. Julian's expression did not change. "I was told to nothing." Amelia blinked. "I don't understand." "Neither do I." He moved to a chair near the fireplace and sat with careful precision. "I did not request companionship. I did not ask for assistance. And I most certainly did not invite someone to be sent to me, like a sacrificial offering." The words struck harder than Amelia expected. She had assumed many things about this arrangement. That the Duke was desperate. That he had bargained for her presence. That this entire situation had been his doing. But if he had not asked for her, then who had? "Victor Stevens," Amelia said slowly, testing the name in this new context. "My fiancé. He said you had made an arrangement." Something dark flickered across Julian's face. "Victor Stevens is a man who builds his fortune on the misfortunes of others. If he told you I requested this, he lied." Amelia's hands curled into fists at her sides. She had suspected Victor of many things over the past weeks: callousness, ambition, a willingness to prioritize status over sentiment, but outright deception about the very foundation of this arrangement? That was a cruelty she had not fully prepared herself to face. "Then why am I here?" she whispered. Julian studied her for a long moment, his gaze moving over her face as if memorizing the pattern of her confusion. "Because men like Victor trade in leverage, and apparently, you were worth something to someone." The room tilted slightly. Amelia pressed a hand to the back of the nearest chair, steadying herself against the weight of that truth. She had been traded, not offered out of necessity, not sacrificed for a greater good. Traded. "You should sit," Julian said quietly, "before you fall." Amelia wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her composure, but her knees betrayed her, and she sank into the chair opposite him, her mind racing. "What happens now?" she managed to ask. Julian leaned back, his expression unreadable. That depends entirely on what you were told to do here. Amelia swallowed hard. I was told to comfort you. To ease your final days. My final days. Julian's mouth curved into something too bitter to be called a smile. How generous of him to provide me with company for my imminent demise. You're not dying. I am not well, Julian corrected. But I am also not on the edge of the grave, despite what society seems to believe. He paused, his eyes sharpening. What else did he tell you? Amelia hesitated. But if this man hadn't asked for her, then she owed Victor's secrets no loyalty. He told me not to help you, she said quietly. He told me not to let nature take its course. The silence that followed was absolute. Julian did not rage, did not stand, or shout, or show any outward sign of anger. But something in his stillness became dangerous. Like a blade held perfectly steady before the strike. He wants me dead, Julian said, his voice soft as silk, and twice as sharp. And he sent you here to watch it happen. Amelia's throat tightened. Yes, but you came anyway. I had no choice. Julian tilted his head slightly. There is always a choice, Miss Hart. Not when the alternative is ruin, Amelia said, her voice hardening. Not when refusal means losing everything. For the first time, something like understanding flickered in Julian's eyes. He nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a truth they both knew too well. Then we find ourselves in a rather unusual position, he said. Clears. You were sent here against your will, to witness my death. I did not request your presence, and have no intention of dying to satisfy anyone's ambitions. He paused. The question is, what do we do about it? Amelia looked at him fully then. Really looked at the man who had been reduced to rumor and scandal. Who had been painted as monstrous when he was simply suffering. Who had been alone in this vast estate, with an illness no one understood, and enemies who wanted skid him gone. And she made a decision. I stay, Amelia said firmly. Not for Victor. Not even for you. For myself. Julian's eyebrows rose slightly. Explain. If I return now, would I go back to a man who lied to me, who used me as a pawn in whatever game he is playing? If I stay here, at least I am making my own choice. She met his gaze directly. And perhaps I can be useful in ways he didn't intend. Julian studied her for a long moment, and Amelia could feel the weight of his assessment. He was deciding whether to trust her, whether to believe her. Finally he spoke. You may stay. But understand this, Miss Hart. I will not use you the way he did. You are not an asset to be spent. Amelia's chest tightened unexpectedly. When was the last time someone had spoken to her as if she mattered beyond what she could provide? Then what am I? She asked softly. Julian stood slowly, moving to the window where moonlight painted his features in shades of silver and shadow. You were not sent here for me, he said again, his voice carrying a weight she did not yet understand. But perhaps you were meant to arrive anyway. Amelia did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing at all. And in the silence that followed, something began that neither of them had planned. Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. I'm working toward 1,000 subscribers. And if Amelia's arrival at Blackthorn Manor has already hooked you, please hit that subscribe button for Oriella Duke Romance Library. Smash the like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Alright, thank you. Now let's get back to what happens when Amelia discovers the truth about why she was really sent there, and what the Duke has been hiding all along. 3 weeks earlier, Amelia Hart had believed she understood her place in the world. She sat in Victor Stevens's study, her fingers flying across the pages of his latest correspondence, organizing chaos into order the way she always did. Around her, evidence of her usefulness lay scattered across every surface. Ledgers she had balanced, letters she had drafted, social connections she had maintained on his behalf. Victor entered the room with the confident stride of a man who had never questioned his own importance. He was handsome in the conventional way, well-dressed, well-spoken, the kind of man society expected women to feel fortunate to marry. "Amelia," he said, his tone warm in the way it always was when he needed something. "How are the arrangements for the Hawthorns' dinner coming along?" "Completed this morning," Amelia replied without looking up. "I sent your regrets along with a gift that will ensure you remain in their favor despite your absence." Victor smiled. "Brilliant. What would I do without you?" The question was rhetorical. They both knew the answer. Amelia had been 17 when Victor first noticed her at a country gathering. Not for her beauty, though she was pretty enough in an understated way. Not for her family connections, which were respectable but unremarkable. He had noticed her because she had solved a seating arrangement disaster that would have embarrassed the host, doing it so smoothly that no one even realized there had been a problem. "You have a remarkable mind," he had told her that night, "or it would be wasted on anyone who did not appreciate it." She had been young enough to believe that was a compliment. Now, at 24, she understood what he had really meant. Her mind was remarkable because it served his purposes. It was valuable because it made him appear more competent than he was. She was appreciated because she was useful, but useful was better than nothing. Useful meant security, a home, a place in society. For a woman with no fortune and modest connections, useful was the best she could hope for. Or so she had convinced herself. "I need to discuss something with you," Victor said, settling into the chair across from her desk. His tone shifted slightly, still pleasant, but with an edge of calculation she had learned to recognize. Amelia set down her pen. "Oh, of course. There is an opportunity that has presented itself. One that could be quite advantageous for both of us." Amelia's stomach tightened. Victor's opportunities always required something from her. "What kind of opportunity?" "You are aware of Duke Julian Thorne, I presume." Amelia frowned. "The recluse. I have heard the rumors, if that's what you mean." "The rumors are useful," Victor said carefully. "They have isolated him from society, made him desperate." "Desperate for what?" Victor leaned forward, his expression almost gentle. "Companionship, comfort, someone to ease his suffering as his condition worsens." Amelia's blood went cold. "Victor, what are you saying?" "I am saying that the Duke has expressed interest in having a woman of quality attend to him during his final months. Someone intelligent, capable, but discreet." He paused. "Someone like you." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of horror through Amelia's chest. "You want me to go to him?" "I want you to help him," Victor corrected smoothly. "To provide comfort to a dying man. Surely that is not so terrible." Amelia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "He is a stranger, a man I have never met, and you expect me to simply go live with him?" "Temporarily," Victor said, rising as well. "Just until the situation resolves itself." The euphemism made Amelia's skin crawl. "Until he dies, you mean?" "Amelia," Victor's voice took on a note of patient condescension. "You are making this more dramatic than it needs to be. The Duke is unwell. He has been abandoned by society. This is an act of charity." "Charity?" Amelia repeated the word like it tasted of ash. "What do you gain from this charity, Victor?" For a moment, his mask slipped, just a fraction, just enough for Amelia to see the cold calculation underneath. "The Duke's estate borders land I have been attempting to acquire. His death would simplify certain negotiations." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "This arrangement benefits everyone. The Duke receives comfort, I secure a business advantage, and you demonstrate the kind of selflessness that will reflect well on both of us when we marry." Amelia stared at him. "You have already agreed to this, haven't you?" Victor's silence was answer enough. "You gave me to him without asking," Amelia whispered. "Like I am property to be lent out." "Don't be hysterical." Victor's tone hardened. "You are my fiancé. Your reputation is tied to mine. When I tell you this is important, you trust me. And if I refuse?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Victor studied her carefully, and Amelia saw him calculating, weighing what leverage he still held, what threats might prove most effective. If you refuse, he said slowly, then you force me to reconsider our arrangement. Your family depends on the security our engagement provides. Your mother's health requires the physicians I have been funding. Your brother's position at my firm could easily be given to someone more grateful. He paused. Refuse me this, Amelia, and you refuse them security. Do you really want to be responsible for that? Amelia's hands trembled. She pressed them flat against her sides, refusing to let him see how deeply his words cut. He had never loved her. She had known that in some abstract way, but she had believed he at least valued her, cared for her comfort, would not actively harm her. But this was harm, deliberate, calculated, wrapped in the language of opportunity and charity. How long? She asked quietly. Victor relaxed slightly, sensing victory. A few months at most. The physicians give him until autumn. And you want me to do nothing? Victor moved closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a confidence. I want you to be kind, compassionate, but not overly helpful. Let nature take its course. The Duke's condition is beyond saving. Any attempt to interfere would only prolong his suffering. Amelia looked at the man she had agreed to marry, or saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. When do I leave? 3 days, Victor said, relief evident in his tone. I will make all the arrangements. You need only pack what you require. Amelia nodded mechanically. She did not trust herself to speak, did not trust what might emerge if she opened her mouth. Victor leaned in to kiss her forehead, a gesture of affection that now felt like ownership. You are doing the right thing, he murmured against her hair. I promise you will be rewarded for this. Amelia closed her eyes and said nothing. That night, alone in her small room, she stared at the ceiling and felt something inside her break. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet fracture, like ice cracking beneath weight it was never meant to bear. She had spent 7 years being useful to Victor Stevens, 7 years solving his problems, managing his affairs, making him appear brilliant to everyone who mattered. And when it came time for him to demonstrate even a fraction of the loyalty she had shown him, he had traded her away without hesitation. The engagement ring on her finger felt suddenly too tight, too heavy. Amelia pulled it off slowly and set it on the bedside table. She did not put it back on. 3 days later, a carriage arrived to take her to Blackthorn Manor. Victor did not come to see her off. He sent a note instead, reminding her to write regularly and to remember his instructions. Amelia folded the note carefully and left it on her bed. She would go to the Duke. She would honor the arrangement because she had no other choice. But she would not honor Victor's intentions. If he wanted the Duke dead, then Amelia would do everything in her power to keep him alive. Not out of kindness, not out of charity, out of spite. Amelia woke on her 3rd morning at Blackthorn Manor to discover that the Duke had not summoned her. The realization settled over her breakfast like frost over glass. She had expected to be called to his chambers, to be put to use in whatever capacity he deemed necessary. Instead, she sat alone in the guest wing's small dining room, attended by a maid who avoided eye contact and spoke only when directly addressed. Is the Duke unwell this morning? Amelia finally asked. The maid, a young woman named Bonnie, glanced toward the door as if checking for listeners. His Grace is always unwell, miss, but he rose early and is in his study. Does he require anything? Bonnie's expression was carefully neutral. His Grace did not mention you, miss. The words should not have stung. Amelia had no particular desire to be needed by yet another man. Yet the dismissal felt pointed, as if Fabian Osborne was making it clear that whatever Victor had intended by sending her, he would not participate. Amelia set down her teacup with more force than necessary. Where is his study? Miss, I don't think. Where? Bonnie's resistance crumbled under Amelia's steady gaze. East wing, 3rd door past the portrait gallery. Amelia rose, smoothing her skirts with hands that trembled slightly from something that might have been anger or might have been determination. She had not asked to be here, had not volunteered for this strange arrangement. But if she was going to be trapped in this estate, she would not sit quietly in a corner, waiting to be acknowledged. The east wing was darker than the rest of the house, with heavy curtains drawn against the morning light. Amelia's footsteps echoed against marble floors as she passed beneath portraits of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to judge her presumption. She found the study door closed but not locked. She knocked once, firmly. "Enter." Julian sat behind a massive oak desk covered in papers, ledgers, and correspondence. He looked up as she entered, his expression shifting from concentration to something more guarded. "Miss Hart, Your Grace." Amelia remained standing just inside the doorway. "I was told you did not require my presence this morning." "I did not. Or yesterday afternoon." "No. Or the evening before that." Julian set down his pen carefully. "Was I you cataloging my negligence? I am trying to understand my purpose here," Amelia said, her voice sharper than she intended. "You allowed me to stay, but you have given me nothing to do. No tasks, no responsibilities. I am simply existing in your home like an ornamental vase. Would you prefer I put you to work?" "I would prefer clarity." Julian leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same intense focus that made Amelia feel like a puzzle he was trying to solve. "The truth is, Miss Hart, I do not know what to do with you." The admission surprised her. "Explain." "You were sent here under false pretenses." "I did not request you, and I have no intention of using you the way your fiancé intended." He paused. "But I also cannot simply send you back, or not when doing so would deliver you into the hands of a man who clearly views you as a tool to be deployed at will." Amelia's throat tightened. "So I am trapped here, out of your sense of obligation. You are here because I refuse to be another man who treats you as disposable." Julian's voice was quiet but firm. "But that does not mean I know what you are meant to do with your days." Amelia moved further into the room, her hands clasping and unclasping at her sides. "I am good at organization, at problem-solving, at seeing patterns others miss. Victor valued those skills at least. I could help you with your estate business if you would allow it. I manage my own affairs. Then let me help you manage your health." Julian's expression shuddered immediately. "No, why not?" "Because I have endured 7 years of physicians who poke and prod and prescribe treatments that accomplish nothing except making me feel like a specimen to be studied." His voice remained level, but Amelia heard the steel beneath it. "I will not add you to that list. I am not a physician." "Exactly. Which means you are even less qualified to interfere." Amelia felt her temper flare. "I am trying to be useful." "I do not want you to be useful." Julian stood abruptly, his palms flat against the desk. "I want you to simply exist here, without obligation. To rest. To read if you wish. To walk the grounds. To do whatever it is women do when they are not being exploited by the men around them." The outburst hung in the air between them. Amelia stared at him, her anger draining away into something more complicated. When was the last time someone had told her to rest, to exist without purpose? Never. The answer was never. "I don't know how to do that," she admitted quietly. Julian's shoulders sagged slightly. He sat back down, suddenly looking more tired than angry. "Neither do I, apparently. But perhaps we could both learn." Amelia moved to the chair opposite his desk, and sat without invitation. "I will make you a deal, Your Grace." "I am wary of deals." "As you should be." Amelia folded her hands in her lap, meeting his gaze directly. "I will not push myself into your affairs uninvited. I will not attempt to manage your health or your household, unless you ask. But in exchange, you must stop treating me like a guest who requires careful handling. If you have work, let me help. If you don't, tell me plainly. But do not lock me away in the guest wing like I am made of spun glass." Julian considered this for a long moment. "You want honesty?" "I want to feel like a person, not a problem." Something flickered across his face. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a feeling he knew too well. "Very well," he said finally. "Honesty I do not trust easily, Miss Hart. I have been betrayed by people who claim to want to help me. So when you offer assistance, my first instinct is to refuse it. That's fair. But, Julian continued, I also recognize that you have been put in an impossible situation, and perhaps we would both be better served by finding a way to coexist that does not require either of us to pretend. Amelia felt something tight in her chest begin to ease. I can work with that. Can you? I can try. Julian's mouth curved into something almost like a smile. Then try this. There are ledgers from the estate's tenant farms that need reviewing. The steward claims everything is in order, but I suspect certain expenses have been inflated. If you truly have a talent for seeing patterns, you might find it interesting. Amelia straightened. You're giving me work? I am giving you a puzzle. Julian pushed a stack of leather-bound books across the desk. If it bores you, stop. If it interests you, continue. Either way, you are not obligated. Amelia reached for the topmost ledger, her fingers tracing the worn leather binding. Why do you suspect the steward? Because men who handle other people's money rarely do so with perfect honesty. That is cynical. That is experience. Amelia opened the ledger, scanning the neat rows of numbers and notations. Already she could see small inconsistencies, duplicate entries, rounded figures that should have been precise. How long has he been in your employ? 4 years. And how long have these discrepancies been occurring? Julian leaned forward slightly. You can see them already. You hired someone with a talent for patterns, Your Grace. I suggest you let me use it. For the first time since Amelia had arrived at Blackthorn Manor, Duke Julian Thorne smiled at her. Not the bitter curve of earlier, not the careful politeness of their first meeting. A real smile, small and fleeting, but genuine. Well, then by all means, Miss Hart. Show me what you can do. Amelia bent over the ledgers with focus that felt like coming home. For the next 3 hours, she and Julian worked in companionable silence, broken only by her occasional questions and his thoughtful answers. And somewhere in that quiet collaboration, something shifted. Amelia stopped feeling like an unwanted obligation, and Julian stopped looking at her like she might shatter. By the time the afternoon light began to fade, Amelia had identified 17 instances of falsified expenses and built a case against the steward that would hold up under scrutiny. You were correct, she said, pushing the final ledger back across the desk. He's been stealing from you systematically for at least 2 years. Julian reviewed her notes with the same intense focus he applied to everything. When he looked up, his expression was thoughtful. Thank you, Miss Hart. Amelia, she said impulsively. If we are to be honest with each other, you should call me Amelia. Julian hesitated, then nodded slowly. Amelia, then you should call me Julian, at least when we are alone. The intimacy of the exchange was not lost on either of them. Amelia stood, suddenly aware that the room had grown dim, and that they had spent the entire afternoon together, without awkwardness or tension. I should dress for dinner. Amelia. Julian's voice stopped her at the door. I am glad you stayed. She turned back to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. But not gratitude exactly. Something deeper, more complicated. So am I, she said quietly, and meant it. The estate physician arrived on Amelia's 8th day at Blackthorn Manor, summoned by Julian's housekeeper without his knowledge or consent. Amelia was in the library when she heard the commotion, raised voices echoing from the main hall, the sharp crack of a walking stick against marble, a man's imperious tone demanding to see the Duke immediately. She set down her book and moved to the doorway, watching as Dr. Radwin Collins swept through the entrance like a storm given human form. He was older, perhaps 60, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned. Where is he? Edwin demanded of the butler. I was informed the Duke has been neglecting his treatments again. His Grace is in his private chambers, Messer, but he left instructions not to be disturbed. I do not require his permission to tend to his health. Edwin started toward the stairs, then stopped abruptly, as his eyes landed on Amelia. "And who are you?" Amelia stepped forward, her spine straight. "Amelia Hart. I am a guest of the Duke." Edwin's gaze raked over her with clinical assessment. "A guest? How unusual. His Grace rarely entertains visitors. Perhaps he is making an exception. Or perhaps you are another fool who believes the Rua." Amelia, heart pounded as the words hung in the air. She had not expected the confrontation to start here, but she would not back down. "Dr. Collins," she said firmly, "I am here because I choose to be." Edwin's eyes narrowed. "You were sent here by Mr. Stevens to watch the Duke die. I know the rumors. You are just another pawn in his game." Amelia lifted her chin. "I was sent here to comfort a man, not to watch him die. And I am not leaving until Julian is safe." Julian emerged from the shadows then, his voice steady. "Dr. Collins, your presence here is unwelcome. Miss Hart is not a pawn. She is a guest who has chosen to stay." Edwin turned to him, his face twisting with rage. "You are still under my care, Your Grace. These treatments are essential. If you continue this way, you will regret it." Julian's expression hardened. "I am not dying. The rumors were lies, and Amelia has helped me see the truth. You have spent 7 years telling me I am on the edge of the grave, when my body has been fighting a different battle all along." Amelia stepped closer to Julian. "What is he talking about?" she whispered. Julian's eyes met hers. "The marks, the fevers, the cycle. It is not just illness. It is something deeper, something Victor and Edwin want me dead to keep their plans alive." Edwin laughed, a harsh sound. "You are both fools. The Duke is dying, and you, Miss Hart, will only slow the inevitable." Amelia felt a surge of anger and determination. She was not going to let this man intimidate her. "I am not slowing anything," she said. "I am saving a life, and I will keep doing it until the truth is out." The doctor left in a huff, but the words he left behind lingered. That night, Amelia and Julian sat by the fire in his study. "I need to tell you something," Julian said quietly. "My father died the same way he is now. Fever, marks, failing health. The physicians said it was a wasting disease, but something in me never believed it. The marks always came back. The fever always returned. I thought it was my fate, but you have shown me it is not." Amelia took his hand. "Then we fight it together." The investigation continued over the next weeks. Amelia discovered old letters in Julian's private desk. Letters from Victor's solicitor, discussing the estate borders. Letters from Edwin's office, noting decline in Julian's records. And then the final piece, the smoking gun. A sealed box hidden behind a false panel in the library. Inside, medical journals from previous generations. Records of a rare virus that had struck the Thorne family 3 times before. A virus that hid in the cells, dormant, until triggered by stress or exposure. The virus that Julian had carried for 7 years without knowing its name. Amelia sat across from Julian, her hands shaking. "It's a virus." Julian's face paled. "A virus?" "Yes. It's not just illness. It's something that has been in your family for generations. It makes you sick, but your body fights it in cycles. The treatments have been keeping the symptoms away, but not curing it. Edwin and Victor want you dead, so they can take the land." Julian pulled her into his arms. "You saved me. I helped you see it," Amelia corrected. "We saved each other." They spent the next 2 days preparing. Amelia researched fever-inducing herbs and protocols. She gathered supplies, arranged for the staff to be given unexpected leave, ensuring privacy, and prepared ice and cool water, and everything they might need if the fever became too dangerous. Julian settled his affairs quietly, just in case. On the 3rd night, Amelia entered his chambers with a tea made from yarrow and boneset, herbs known to trigger intense immune responses. Julian sat by the fire, watching her approach. "Last chance to change your mind," Amelia said softly. "I have been dying slowly for 7 years," Julian replied. I would rather risk death trying to live. Amelia knelt beside his chair and handed him the cup. Drink this, all of it. Julian took it without hesitation and drained the contents. The tea was bitter, and he grimaced. How long? He asked. The fever should begin within an hour. It will build gradually. Amelia took the empty cup and set it aside. Dear, I will stay with you through all of it. You should not. If this goes wrong, then I will be here. Amelia took his hand. You are not facing this alone. Julian pulled her closer, and Amelia let herself be drawn into his lap. She settled against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her ear. They sat like that as the fire burned low and the night deepened. Julian's arms wrapped around her waist, her head tucked beneath his chin. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. The fever began as Julian had predicted. First a flush across his skin, then trembling, then heat that radiated from him, like he had swallowed the sun. Amelia eased him into bed, covering him with light linens. She bathed his forehead with cool cloths, helped him drink when his throat grew too dry. The marks darkened rapidly, all spreading across his chest and arms in patterns Amelia had never seen before. They looked almost like rivers of shadow beneath his skin, all flowing toward some central point. Julian's breathing grew labored. His body shook with chills despite the fever burning through him. Talk to me, he gasped. Keep me here. Amelia climbed onto the bed beside him, holding his hand tightly. I am here. I am not leaving. If this does not work, it will work. Amelia, his eyes found hers, fever bright but focused. If it does not, I need you to know these past weeks with you have been the only time I have felt truly alive in 7 years. Amelia's throat tightened. Do not say goodbye. I am saying thank you. Julian's fingers tightened around hers. For seeing me, or for believing I was worth saving. You are worth everything, Amelia whispered fiercely. Julian's eyes closed. His breathing came in sharp, painful gasps. The marks on his skin were almost black now, spreading faster than Amelia had ever seen. She monitored his pulse, her temperature, waited for the crisis point she knew had to come. It happened just before dawn. Julian convulsed once, his entire body going rigid. Amelia held him steady, her own heart hammering with terror. Then he went completely still. For one horrible moment, Amelia thought she had killed him, but his chest rose, fell, rose again, and slowly, impossibly, the marks began to fade. Not the way they had before, not the slow recession over weeks. This was rapid, deliberate, like ink being drawn back into a well. Amelia watched, breathless, as the darkness retreated from Julian's skin, as color returned to his face, as his breathing eased into something deeper and more natural than she had ever heard. The fever broke with the sunrise. Julian opened his eyes as golden light spilled through the windows. He looked at Amelia, his gaze clear and focused in a way it had not been for hours. Are you alive? He asked, his voice rough. Amelia laughed, the sound breaking on a sob. Yes, very much alive. Julian lifted a shaking hand to his chest, touching the skin where the marks had been darkest. They were gone, not faded. Gone. His skin was pale, but whole, unmarked. It worked, he breathed. It worked, Amelia confirmed. Julian reached for her, pulling her down against him with sudden strength. He kissed her fiercely, and tasting of salt and relief, and something that felt like joy. You saved me, he murmured against her lips. We saved you, Amelia corrected. Your body did the work. I just gave it permission. They lay together as the morning light grew stronger, neither willing to move, neither willing to break the spell of this impossible moment. What happens now? Julian asked eventually. Amelia thought of Edwin, of Victor, of the world beyond Blackthorn Manor, that still believed Duke Julian Thorne was dying. Now, she said, we show them how wrong they were. The recovery was not instantaneous, but it was undeniable. Within a week, Julian's color had returned completely. His strength rebuilt itself day by day. The pain that had plagued him for 7 years vanished like it had never existed. But Edwin Collins arrived for his scheduled examination, to find Julian walking the estate, gardens without assistance. His skin clear, his vitality obvious. The physician stood frozen in the entrance hall, his medical bag clutched in white-knuckled hands. "This is impossible," Edwin whispered. Amelia descended the stairs to stand beside Julian. "No, Doctor Collins. It is simply what happens when someone actually tries to heal, rather than manage decline." Edwin's gaze snapped to her, and she saw the moment he understood. "You did this." "She saved my life," Julian said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Which makes your failure over the past 7 years all the more damning. I followed established protocols. I provided the best care medical science could offer. You provided the care that kept me dependent on you," Julian corrected coldly. "You saw evidence of potential recovery and buried it. I have your notes, Edwin. All of them." Edwin went pale. "You broke into my office. I borrowed records that should have been shared with me from the beginning." Julian stepped forward, and despite his recent illness, he moved with the coiled power of someone who would not be challenged. "You let me suffer because it benefited you. That ends now. You cannot prove. I can prove that you documented regenerative healing, and chose not to pursue it. I can prove that you dismissed alternative approaches without investigation. I can prove that you labeled me terminal, when your own notes suggested otherwise." Julian's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Or would you like me to share those proofs with the medical board? Or would you prefer to quietly retire from practice?" Edwin's face twisted through rage, fear, and finally resignation. "You would ruin me. You ruined 7 years of my life." "I am being generous." Edwin looked between Julian and Amelia, something ugly flickering in his expression. "She has bewitched you, filled your head with dangerous ideas. When you relapse." "I will not relapse." Julian's certainty was absolute. "Because the infection you never bothered to properly identify has been purged. My body has healed itself, and I have Miss Hart to thank for recognizing what you refused to see." Edwin opened his mouth, then closed it. He seemed to age a decade in that moment, his shoulders slumping. "I am sorry," he said finally, though the words sounded hollow. "I believed I was helping." "You believed what was convenient," Amelia said quietly. "That is not the same thing." Edwin left without another word. They never saw him again. The news of Julian's recovery spread through society like wildfire. The Duke who had been dying was not only alive but thriving. The rumors that had painted him as monstrous dissolved in the face of his obvious vitality. Invitations began arriving, requests for audiences. Society suddenly remembered it had always held Duke Julian Thorne in the highest regard. Julian burned most of them, but one letter he read carefully, before handing it to Amelia. It was from Victor Stevens. "Your Grace," it began with oily formality, "I was delighted to hear of your remarkable recovery. As you may recall that I had sent my dear fiancée Amelia Hart to provide comfort during your court illness. I trust she served you well. And I would be grateful if you would arrange for her safe return now that your health is restored." Amelia felt cold rage settle in her chest. "He still thinks I am his, are you?" Julian asked quietly. Amelia looked up at him, at the man who had been a stranger 6 weeks ago, and was now someone she could not imagine being without, who had never asked her to be useful, who had seen her as a partner, not an asset. "No," she said firmly. "I am not." "Then we should make that clear." They wrote the response together, Julian's elegant script filling the page with words that left no room for misinterpretation. "Mr. Stevens, Miss Amelia Hart is no longer in your service, or under your authority. What our engagement was dissolved by mutual agreement weeks ago. She has chosen to remain at Blackthorn Manor, of her own free will, and in a capacity you have no claim to question. You traded her away, expecting me to die, and your schemes to prosper. I suggest you adjust your expectations regarding both outcomes. Duke Julian Thorne. They sent it by courier that same day. Victor's response arrived within 48 hours. Not by letter this time. He came in person. Amelia was in the library when she heard the commotion in the entrance hall. Raised voices, the butler's firm attempts to deny entry, and then Victor's unmistakable tone demanding to see what was rightfully his. She stood slowly, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Julian appeared in the library doorway. He is here. I know. You do not have to face him. Yes, Amelia said quietly. I do. They descended to the drawing room together. Victor stood with his back to the door, radiating indignation. He turned as they entered, and Amelia saw the moment he registered their linked hands. Saw the calculation in his eyes as he assessed the situation. Amelia? He said, his voice dripping false warmth. Thank God. I was worried you had been coerced into staying here. I was coerced into coming here, Amelia corrected coldly. By you. Staying was my choice. Victor's smile tightened. Surely you are grateful for your service to the Duke to be completed. You can come home now. This is my home. The words hung in the air. Victor's expression flickered through confusion, anger, and finally understanding. Well, no, you cannot possibly think to remain here. People will talk. Your reputation. My reputation was already sacrificed when you sent me to a manned private estate unchaperoned, Amelia said. I find I care very little about society's opinion now. Victor's gaze shifted to Julian. Your Grace, surely you see the impropriety of keeping another man's fiancée under your roof. Miss Hart is not your fiancée, Julian said with devastating calm. She has not been since she removed your ring weeks ago. A fact you would know if you had bothered to inquire about her well-being even once during her full time here. I entrusted her to your care. You traded her like property, and expected me to be dead before anyone noticed. Julian's voice remained level, but Amelia heard the steel beneath it. That plan failed spectacularly, and I suggest you accept defeat with what little grace you can manage. Victor's composure finally cracked. You think you can simply take her. I made her what she is. I gave her a place in society. She owes me nothing. Amelia interrupted, her voice ringing with absolute conviction. I owe you nothing, Victor. I gave you 7 years of my life, my skills, my loyalty, and you repaid me by gambling my safety for your ambitions. That debt is settled. You are making a mistake, Victor said, his tone turning threatening. Without me, you have no connections, no support. Your family, my family will manage, Amelia said. As will I. Victor stared as if seeing a stranger. Perhaps he was. The Amelia who had quietly accepted his decisions and swallowed her doubts no longer existed. She had burned away in Blackthorn's fires like an infection finally purged. You will regret this, Victor said quietly. The only thing I regret, Amelia replied, is not leaving you years ago. Victor's face twisted with fury. For a moment, Amelia thought he might actually try to physically remove her. But Julian shifted slightly, moving between them, and something in his posture made Victor reconsider. This is not over, Victor said instead. Yes, Julian said. It is. Leave my estate, Mr. Ferd, and do not return. The butler appeared as if summoned, 2 footmen at his side. Victor looked between them, his face mottled with rage and humiliation. He left without another word. Amelia did not watch him go. She had already turned away, her hand still clasped in Julian's, so her future suddenly vast and terrifying, and entirely her own. Are you all right? Julian asked softly once they were alone. Amelia thought about the question. She was unengaged, unchaperoned, living in a duke's estate with no formal role or protection. By every measure of propriety she should be ruined. But she had never felt more powerful. Yes, she said. I am all right. Julian pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her waist. Amelia Hart, he said. I have a question to ask you. Amelia's heart stuttered. What kind of question? The kind that requires a proper answer, not a strategic one. Julian's thumb traced her cheekbone. Will you stay here? Not as a guest, not as a companion, but as mine? Amelia's breath caught. Are you proposing? Not yet. Julian's smile was small and genuine. You just ended one engagement. But I would not rush you into another before you have had time to. Simply exist without obligation. He paused. But I want you to know my intentions. When you are ready, if you are ready, I will ask properly. With a ring and ceremony, and everything society expects. And if I am never ready, then I will be grateful for whatever you choose to give me. Julian's expression was utterly sincere. I do not need you to be useful, Amelia. I do not need you to manage my affairs or elevate my status. I simply want you here because you choose to be. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. I choose to be here, then that is enough. He kissed her then, and Amelia felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. Victor's ring was gone. Edwin's failures were exposed. Or the woman who had arrived at Blackthorn Manor believing she was being discarded had discovered she was worth choosing. Julian, she murmured against his lips. Yes? Ask me anyway. He pulled back, searching her face. Are you certain? I spent 7 years being certain I could not have better than what I was offered. I am done settling. Amelia's hands cupped his face. Ask me. Julian sank to one knee before her, and Amelia's breath left her in a rush. Amelia Hart, he said, his voice steady and sure. You saw me when the world had already written me off. You fought for my life when it would have been easier to let me fade. You are brilliant and stubborn, and absolutely terrifying in the best possible way. He took her hands in his. I have no ring yet, no formal preparation, but I cannot wait another moment to ask. Will you marry me? Amelia's vision blurred with tears. Yes. Julian stood and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet, as he kissed her with an intensity that spoke of relief, and joy, and promises kept. When he set her down, both were breathless. Your Grace, Amelia said with a smile. I believe we have scandalized your entire household. Let them talk. Julian's grin was wicked. We will give them much better material to gossip about once we are married. Amelia laughed, the sound bright and free. You are incorrigible. I am alive, Julian corrected. Thanks to you. We saved each other, Amelia said. Let's be clear about that. Julian tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch tender. Very well. Then let us continue saving each other for the rest of our lives. I can accept those terms. They stood together in the drawing room, as sunset light painted everything gold. Outside, the estate gardens bloomed with early spring flowers. The household carried on with its usual business, only slightly rattled by the day's excitement. And inside, two people who had been given up on by the world found themselves choosing each other with absolute certainty. 3 months later, Amelia Hart became Amelia Thorne, Duchess of Blackthorn, in a ceremony attended by a small collection of genuine friends and conspicuously absent Victor Stevens. She wore a gown of deep blue silk. Julian stood beside her in perfect health, his vows steady and sure. When the vicar pronounced them married, Julian kissed her like she was the only solid thing in a tilting world. And Amelia, who had spent so many years being useful to people who did not value her, finally understood what it meant to be truly chosen. Not for what she could provide, not for what she could accomplish, but simply for who she was. In the months that followed, Amelia established a clinic on the estate grounds. She worked with physicians who were willing to challenge conventional thinking, who saw patients as people, not just collections of symptoms to be managed. Julian supported her work without question, providing funding and resources. He also recovered his position in society, though he was far more selective about which invitations he accepted. They received word that Edwin Collins had retired to the countryside, that Victor Stevens had suffered a series of business reversals, and was no longer the rising star he had once been. Amelia felt no particular satisfaction in their downfalls. She was too busy building a life that mattered. But on quiet evenings, when she and Julian sat together in his study, working on their respective projects with the easy companionship of true partnership, Amelia would sometimes look up and catch him watching her. "What?" she would ask, smiling. "Just remembering," Julian would reply. "The night you walked into my chambers expecting to find a monster, and found a duke instead, and found each other." Amelia would cross to him then, settling into his lap the way she had that first fevered night. And Julian would wrap his arms around her, pulling her close. "I love you," he would murmur against her hair. "But I know," Amelia would reply. "I figured that out when you chose to live." "I chose,"